everyone, welcome back to the Support the Spectrum channel. My name is Ryann Sutera. I'm a neurodiversity affirming speech language pathologist. Today we're going to be talking about the history of autism and the history of autistic people. I have made this video 2 times actually in short form ways on my social media. I do it every year in Autism Acceptance Month, and I think it's really important to note the history, especially during these times where people are spreading narratives that autism did not exist when they were growing up, that it is destroying families, and quite a bit of eugenic and ableist rhetoric is being spread about. So we are going to talk about how autistic people have always been, they always will, and we're going to talk about some harsh truths. So I want to do a trigger warning. We will be talking about trauma, we will be talking about abuse. If that is not conducive to your journey at this point, please click away, return when you can perhaps, and know that we're also going to be talking about suicide. The first year that I made this video, I was more bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. It was my first year doing Support the Spectrum. I had more of a positive spin on the history of autism because I wanted to take that approach. I wanted to share the beautiful things that autism has brought to this world. And then the second year, which was last year, I felt that I needed to be more truthful because I found out that autistic people are 7 times more likely to commit suicide than neurotypical people. And there's a reason for that. It's not solely because of our current situation, although that plays a huge role in it. But we need to know about historically how people thought and treated neurodivergent people and how that feeling still runs deep in our society. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All the references that I source this information from will be in the description below. There isn't much research to show what was happening in really early history. The only thing that I was able to find is predating the year 20 Common Era. Some geneticists and archaeologists believe that there is evidence to support that autistic people who have high awareness to detail and sensory sensitivities were highly celebrated in certain cultures because of their ability to track and navigate and make note of things that could be possible dangers for their society. So for example, there might be certain foods that are poisonous that a autistic person or neurodivergent person would be able to identify better than a neurotypical people, possibly because of their fast visual sensory profiles, processing profiles. Perhaps, they have a heightened sensitivity to smell that helps with certain identification of dangers. And someone who is autistic or neurodivergent who has high sensitivity to visual information may also be able to help track and navigate certain nomadic tribes or people who live nomadic lifestyles. So there is evidence to support that those things could be celebrated. However, knowing what I know now, I believe that those autistic people were most likely more low support needs. They probably weren't demonstrating communication difficulties, mobility difficulties. They probably just had those profiles of having different sensory sensitivities. There's also another record from the year 42 Common Era, where the Roman philosopher Gaius Plinius Secundus, also known as Pliny the Elder, wrote about a child who would only communicate by repeating certain words. During medieval times, there was a long-running European superstition that autistic and disabled people were possessed by demons, fairies, trolls, and this superstition was really strong. And a result of this superstition is that they would torture autistic people. Specifically, they would drown them, burn them, beat them with sticks, cook them in a pot or an oven. And the purpose of doing this was so that they could torture the person enough to get the troll or fairy to come out of them. So they didn't believe that these people were people, and they believed that some evil spirit was living inside of them, and they thought if they tortured them enough that that evil spirit would come out and admit that they weren't a real person the whole time. So this idea that disabled people are not people, they're not humans, they don't have real souls, they must be unhuman. Again, this does carry on into modern day, so it's really important to know the origins of that. There are still many cultures who believe autism and neurodivergence and disability to be a curse. I personally have worked with 4 families who have had to sit down and almost beg them to look at the research because they have their own personal historical beliefs, and they are ableist, and they are magical and spiritual in a sense. And so imagine having conversations where you're trying to convince people that disabled people are human and they're not being cursed or punished by having a disabled person in their life. Just something that if you're a future therapist, if you are a therapist now, I hope I validate that experience for all of you. I hope I educate you for what you might see in the future. It's an intercultural conversation that has to be had, and you can see where those things come from. We're talking about European folklore here, but there are many Asian countries, African countries, South American countries, everywhere that believe that they are being punished when they have a disabled child. So it's good to know. More evidence to support that neurodivergent people have always been around us is that in the late 1500s, a Spanish physician, Juan Huerte, described a patient who had difficulty communicating and socializing with others. Also in the 1700s and 1800s, there were several recorded cases of children who exhibited symptoms that we now recognize as autism. Specifically, we're talking about one French physician, Jean Itard, who worked with a boy named Victor, who demonstrated difficulty with language acquisition and social communication. So these are examples of researchers, physicians, noting different behaviors and patterns that they saw in certain children, it sounds like, and perhaps they were not being abusive to them. You know what I mean? One of them, literally, the late 1500s is around the same time that these long-standing folklore traditions were happening in Europe. And so perhaps there was light where there is darkness. I don't know how those children who were being studied were treated specifically, but if they were true scientists, true physicians, perhaps they were just observing and not harming, So hopefully, and I do believe this, I have to believe this or else I'm going to be a puddle of tears, is that there is always someone doing the right thing throughout history. And I really hope we can, as a community, all be those people. These superstitions, though, the European folklore superstitions, they did carry into the 19th century. In fact, in 1826, a woman named Anne Roche held a child, Michael Leahy, who was 4 years old, underwater in the Flesk River 3 times until he drowned. She went to court and was acquitted of murder because she said she was merely trying to drive the fairy out of him. So you can see how that superstition ran so deep. Even in the court of law, they said that her reasoning made sense. They acquitted her of murder, and she murdered a 4-year-old boy, a disabled, possibly autistic 4-year-old boy. Now, something that is very pertinent to the history of autism is the actual root meaning of that word. Autism is a Greek word coming from the meaning self. And actually, in 1911, the term autism was first used by Swiss psychologist Eugen Bleuler to describe withdrawn behavior of some schizophrenic patients. So that's a true history of the word autism. Now, moving on, not exactly moving forward because this was most likely happening throughout history as long as anyone can remember, but the truth that we all know is that autistic, disabled, neurodivergent people were put into asylums and they were institutionalized as soon as their differences were noted. They were not receiving adequate care. They were being tortured in many, many ways, and they suffered those poor conditions and were subjected to neglect and abuse. In 1938, Donald Gray Triplett is an American man. He was known for being the first person diagnosed with autism. Triplet was noted for his savant abilities, particularly the ability to name musical notes played on a piano and the ability to perform rapid mental multiplication. And this man just died in 2023. Rest in peace, Donald. You know, this is all within our lifetime, is the first person being diagnosed autistic. It's very, very interesting. He was an autistic person who presented with these savant abilities, right? So I know that every person suffers some type of heartbreak and loss in their life. So I'm not saying he had a perfect life, but compared to many other autistic neurodivergent people, he's low support needs, savant abilities, and he received enough support to actually get a diagnosis. There are still people today who can't get a diagnosis who are high support needs. So just, I'm happy for Donald. That should be the way that it is for everyone. In 1943, American child psychiatrist Leo Kanner published a paper describing a group of 11 children with similar symptoms, including social isolation, language difficulties, and repetitive behaviors. He coined the term early infantile autism to describe the condition. So again, more evidence that these children were around, these people were around forever. But you have to understand, guys, at the same time that we're making these strides in autism research and identification, as recently as the 1960s, there were psychologists saying that autism is a result of uncaring mothers. As we get into the late 60s, 70s, 80s, research is now being more tailored to finding underlying neurological causes of autism. There's more emerging of how to support autistic people. But that doesn't mean that everything was sunshines and rainbows, because in the 80s is when they started to use the high functioning, low functioning verbiage, when they started using severities to describe autism. So again, we are not perfect, we're making strides, but obviously today, and if you didn't know this, we do not use the terms high functioning or low functioning autism. The word functioning means that you are comparing a disabled person to how much they can contribute to a neurotypical society independently. It's an extremely ableist viewpoint. You cannot have the same expectations for many disabled people, and you can't categorize them by how well they're able to contribute to a neurotypical society or function in a neurotypical society without accommodations. It's crazy. We also don't use severities for autism. We do not say that someone has severe autism. We say they're high support needs. We don't say that someone has mild autism. We say they're low support needs. We do not say that someone has Asperger's. The history of Asperger's is so problematic. That term was coined because they are people who wanted a certain subset of autistic people, the low support needs subset, to be seen as more valuable and separated from the rest of the autistic community. It's crazy. Please don't use that term anymore. It's literally like ableism within the autistic community. It's some autistic people saying, oh, I'm autistic, but I'm not that autistic. Excuse me? And then some more recent history from the 90s and the 2000s. Autism awareness grew significantly. There was more funding for autism research. There was increased media coverage and advocacy. And then in 2013, the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders came out, which redefined the diagnostic criteria for autism. It got rid of the diagnosis of Asperger's, and it got rid of pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. And we've been making strides and strides since then. In 2017, autism was added to the Maori Te Reo language as Takiwatanga, which translates to my own place in time. I just love this fact. I love the idea of a long-standing indigenous culture recognizing people within their community, giving them a name and awareness and recognition, and that name being my own time and space. Your own time and space. So it's such a difference between the Greek origins of autism and the selfish narrative that they were putting on autistic people to my own time and space. And if a culture that has been going on for so long and has, deep, long-standing values could make that positive change, holy cow, we all could make that positive change. And now we're in the 2020s, right? I do think there has been a giant surge of awareness, acceptance, people understanding autism way more. Sometimes I feel a little clouded because I'm in this world, right? I'm in the world of neurodiversity support. And so, of course, it looks that way to me because that's what I'm around. There's many times when I've had to educate people, but they're typically very open to learning, and that's my world. And then you see people in power saying certain things that could start a whole mess of hatred and judgment and lack of funding and lack of research, which is happening right now, and it's scary. Right now, in 2025, the Department of Defense Research Program and the National Science Foundation Autism Studies have been cut. They've been defunded. There are support programs like the Vanderbilt's Frisk Center Support for Autism Innovation and the Charting My Success program that have been defunded and cut. Meals on Wheels is being threatened with cuts. The ACL, the CMS, the NIH are all being threatened with losing cuts. These are protection agencies for neurodivergent and disabled people. And why is this happening? Well, many reasons, but a huge one is that our own government is starting to see these people as burdens. They don't see the value in having neurodivergent people or disabled people around. In my research, I found hope because I found a fascinating ancient history. The ancient history of autism is mainly speculative, but common traits such as attention to detail, differences in perception, preferring rules, structure, and order, preferring informational exchanges rather than social exchanges, being the main sources of representation of autism in ancient times. And that makes sense because, of course, we can't confirm whether or not those people were autistic. But what is interesting is that these traits were not seen in our previous species. They were not seen in Neanderthals, and they were not seen in Denisovans. It wasn't until 100,000 years ago that any evidence of autistic characteristics emerged. Recording systems and art with increased detail were found at this time. Many of these new elements were associated with what is now considered modern human behavior, but some researchers believe that it is autistic behavior. And so the reason this gave me hope is because it means that humans, Homo sapiens, have never existed without autistic people around them, without neurodivergent people, without disabled people. They have always been around, truly since the beginning of time. They are people who helped us build our societies, and they are important. I know I'm preaching to the choir. I don't think you would have found my page if you didn't agree with me, but I can't feel good about Autism Acceptance and Awareness Month ending without talking about, let me gain my composure. I have to keep pushing that narrative. These people are not burdens. They are foundational to our human existence, okay? This is not a new epidemic. They have always been around. And I'm not trying to say that autism or disability is a superpower, because that's also a very dangerous narrative. But what I am trying to say is they are not here to be productive for you. It all comes down to what we see the worth of a human life being. And I think if we start this game of pointing fingers of which human life matters more, or which human life we should protect, or which human life we should put our resources towards, that's a very dangerous game to play. And we've seen how it's gone in the past. I think that's everything that I have to share today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for spending this time with me. Please subscribe, comment, share this video with people who need to see it, and I will see you in the next one.